She raised his kids, paid their bills, and stood by their father for 25 years, only to be left with nothing at the will reading. But what his children didn't know was that the real inheritance hadn't even been read yet. As mourners gathered for the reading of Arthur's will, Eleanor sat quietly in the back, never expecting the truth to shatter decades of loyalty in a single sentence. The room was still, save for the subtle hum of the ceiling fan and the soft shuffle of papers. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, casting a golden hue across the polished oak furniture of the downtown law office. Leather-bound law books lined the walls like silent witnesses. A silver tray of untouched coffee and shortbread cookies sat forgotten near the reception desk. Eleanor sat slightly apart from the rest, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her simple dark dress neat and unassuming. Her posture was graceful, but her eyes were tired, carrying the weight of a woman who had given far more than she'd ever received. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone told a story the others refused to see. Across the room sat Arthur's 3 children, Thomas, Sarah, and David, dressed in black, but radiating impatience rather than grief. Their murmured whispers paused only when they cast sidelong glances toward Eleanor. Cold, calculated, as if she were a stranger, not the woman who had helped raise them. They'd never called her mother, not even once. Sarah, the oldest, tapped her manicured nails against her phone screen, scrolling idly as the lawyer shuffled through papers. Thomas kept checking his watch while David leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. They didn't acknowledge Eleanor. They never really had, but Eleanor remembered everything. She remembered driving Sarah across state lines to college because she was too anxious to fly. She remembered co-signing Thomas's first car loan and paying it off quietly when Thomas couldn't. She remembered taking out a second mortgage on her own small apartment to fund David's doomed startup venture that went belly up within a year. Through it all, she stood by Arthur, never once questioning his love or his loyalty. But even love Eleanor had learned could come with caveats. Arthur had been her partner for 25 years. 25 years of steady companionship, shared holidays, quiet nights watching classic films, and long talks about life, about legacy. He'd told her more than once that she considered her his anchor. And yet, in this moment, seated in a room full of legal documents and silent judgments, Eleanor felt like driftwood, untethered in a current. She looked down at the simple silver bracelet on her wrist. It had never left her hand since the day they exchanged commitment vows in that quiet beach ceremony where only Arthur's close friend had shown up to witness. His children had refused to attend. She remembered Arthur's trembling voice that day. How? He'd apologized again and again for their absence. "It doesn't matter," Eleanor had said, smiling. "What matters is us." And for a long time that had been enough. But now, surrounded by the sharp scent of expensive perfume and the rustle of designer clothing, Eleanor couldn't shake the cold that settled in her chest. She wasn't naive. She knew she was never truly accepted by his children. They tolerated her barely. They nodded when necessary, smiled when it served them. But behind their eyes she always saw it. The resentment, the skepticism, the discomfort of privilege when confronted by presence. She didn't come from money. She didn't have the pedigree or the country club connections. What she had was loyalty, hard-earned wisdom, and love, pure unshakable love for Arthur. So, she sat in silence, letting the echoes of his memory wash over her as the lawyer finally cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here today to honor the last will and testament of Arthur James Whitmore." Eleanor's chest tightened at the sound of his full name. He'd always insisted she call him Art. It was their private thing. Sweet, simple, theirs. She glanced once more at his children. Sarah now had her arms crossed, already bored. David looked like he was calculating the worth of every asset he expected to receive. Thomas just seemed eager to be done with it all. Eleanor took a slow breath. She hadn't come for money. She didn't need validation. She came for closure. But deep inside her, buried beneath years of patience and restraint, something whispered a warning. That this day, this quiet sunlit afternoon, would reveal more than she was prepared to hear. And in just a few moments it would. The attorney adjusted his glasses and began to read, his voice steady and formal, slicing through the heavy silence like a gavel. "To my beloved daughter, Sarah," he said, "I leave the lake house in upstate New York along with all furnishings therein." Sarah sat up straighter, lips curling into a satisfied smile. She didn't even try to hide it. Eleanor watched her out of the corner of her eye, but kept her expression still. That house had been Arthur's favorite escape, but it had also been Eleanor's project. She'd personally restored the wraparound porch, laid the stone path by the garden, even built the bookshelves in the study with her own hands. "To my son, Thomas," the lawyer continued, "I leave my investment portfolio valued at approximately $850,000 along with my personal stocks in Whitmore Holdings." Thomas let out a quiet exhale of relief, mouthing a silent yes. Eleanor remembered those stocks. How Arthur had once said he'd never sell them unless they were desperate. Apparently not desperate enough to share them with the woman who'd helped him weather 2 recessions. The attorney went on, "To David, I leave the heirloom watch collection passed down from my grandfather, including the platinum pocket watch and the vintage sports car, which Eleanor so graciously kept in working condition." Eleanor blinked. She remembered countless Saturdays spent under that car, elbow deep in grease. She'd restored it not because David appreciated it. David hadn't even known how to start it, but because Arthur had asked her to keep it alive for the legacy. Now it would sit in David's garage, likely untouched like a forgotten trophy. Eleanor's heart beat slower with each line. She didn't interrupt. She didn't shift in her chair. But inside, a quiet ache began to form. Not because she wanted any of it, but because she suddenly wondered if she had ever truly belonged in this family at all. The lawyer shuffled more papers. "To my second cousin, Mark, I leave the antique china set as he always admired it during holidays." Eleanor almost smiled. Mark had only shown up once in the past decade, arriving late and leaving early, but even he, it seemed, had earned a mention. She waited for her name, waited for a word, a gesture, something to acknowledge the years. As the legal drone of property divisions filled the room, Eleanor's mind began to wander, pulling her backward in time. It was almost 30 years ago. Arthur had hired her to consult on office renovations. She'd been running her own small design firm, direct, sharp-tongued, but still warm beneath the surface. She remembered the way he'd stood in the middle of the dusty construction site, slightly lost, arms crossed, pointing at every wall he wanted gone. "You're the designer, right?" he'd asked. Eleanor had nodded, holding back a smile. "Only if you don't scare easy." He hadn't laughed then, but he did later. 3 weeks into the job over a shared lunch and stories of complicated families. He told her he didn't trust anyone anymore. She didn't ask him to. Love didn't arrive all at once. Came in slow, soft waves. A cup of coffee left out for her in the mornings. A folded blanket left on the porch swing after long days. And finally, the trembling invitation to dinner. Just dinner. But everything changed after that. His kids had hated it. They called her the caretaker when they spoke about her. Sometimes even to her face. Arthur defended her at first, but over time he softened the edges to keep the peace. "They just need time," he had said once, resting his head on her shoulder. "They're not used to someone like you." Eleanor had swallowed that sentence whole, knowing exactly what it meant. Not just someone without inherited wealth or someone not from their social circle. It was everything. Her background, her independence, her quiet strength. Still she stayed. She paid for Sarah's private high school when her mother bailed. She paid Thomas's first semester at an expensive university and David's second attempt at starting a business after the first one failed. She took no credit, no pride. She did it because Arthur loved them and she loved him. Love, she believed, meant stepping up even when no one applauded. And now here she was sitting among those who had never clapped for her once. The lawyer cleared his throat and looked around the room. "We are nearing the conclusion of Mr. Whitmore's will. There are a few final statements before we close." Eleanor sat up slightly, eyes forward. Perhaps now, surely now, she had waited long enough. The attorney's voice lowered slightly, as if sensing the weight of what came next. He straightened the final page and glanced briefly around the room before reading the last line aloud. To my loving partner, Eleanor, I leave my gratitude. For a moment, the room fell utterly silent. Then came the gasps, quiet, sharp, almost synchronized. The kind of collective disbelief that cuts through air like a sudden gust of wind. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to fade as all eyes turned toward Eleanor. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply sat there, frozen, her spine rigid, her fingers twitching slightly on the armrest of the chair. My gratitude, 2 words. That was it. After 25 years of shared life, a lifetime of sacrifices, and building a family that was never truly hers, all Arthur had left her was a sentiment, a breath on paper. Nothing more. The attorney, unsure how to proceed, looked up, his lips parting slightly, but the damage had already been done. Eleanor blinked once, twice. She stared at the papers in the lawyer's hand as if willing the words to change. But they remained the same, indifferent and unmoved. Arthur was gone, and this was his final word. No house, no account, no acknowledgement, nothing. Across the room, David leaned back in his chair with a smug expression, crossing his arms like a king surveying conquered land. Sarah raised her eyebrows in mock surprise and exchanged a look with Thomas, who let out a quiet snort. Then came the whisper, low, cruel, and cutting. Guess she finally sees her place. Eleanor heard it. Of course she did. Every word landed like a nail into her chest, but she said nothing. She stood slowly, adjusting her simple dress as if bracing for cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes shimmered with the kind of pain that comes from deep, quiet betrayal, the kind you never see coming because you trusted too much. She nodded once to the lawyer, not out of respect, but simply because she still believed in dignity, even when dignity wasn't returned. Then she turned and walked out. The sound of her footsteps echoed against the marble floor, each one slower than the last. She didn't glance back. She didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. But just before she reached the door, her hand lifted slightly to her face. She wiped the corner of her eye once, then kept walking. Outside, the sun still hung in the sky, but it no longer felt warm. The city carried on as usual. Cars honking, pedestrians rushing by, a delivery man yelling into his phone. Life moved forward, unaware of the heartbreak taking place just beyond the office door. Eleanor walked to the edge of the sidewalk and stopped. The traffic light turned green, but she didn't cross. She stood still, staring at nothing. Her reflection in the nearby glass showed a woman who had given everything and received nothing in return. She thought about the early mornings when she made Arthur coffee before he woke up, the way he used to laugh when she fixed the broken faucet in the dead of winter without asking, the anniversaries he never missed, the times she defended his kids, even when they disrespected her. She'd done all of it with love, not for recognition, not for reward, but this silence from beyond the grave, this erasure of everything she had been to him, cut deeper than she expected. Her shoulders sagged. A pedestrian brushed past her, muttering an apology. Eleanor barely noticed. All she could think was, why? Why had he left her with nothing? Had she misread everything? Was his love just words? Was his silence around his children's disdain a form of quiet agreement? Had she simply been convenient? She wanted to scream, but Eleanor didn't believe in loud displays of emotion. She'd been taught all her life to be quiet, unobtrusive. So instead, she walked down the block, past the cafe where she and Arthur used to share afternoon tea, past the little shop where he bought her a small gift every week, and into the long afternoon where questions pressed heavy against her chest. But answers remained cruelly out of reach. 3 days had passed. Eleanor hadn't returned a single call. She hadn't stepped back into the house she once shared with Arthur. Now, technically Sarah's, according to the will. She'd spent the last 72 hours in a small rented apartment across town, Surrounded by moving boxes, she didn't yet have the strength to unpack. She hadn't cried, not because she didn't want to, but because the pain sat in a place too deep for tears. It lived beneath the bones where only silence could reach. Then, on the fourth morning, something unexpected arrived. A knock at the door, light, almost hesitant. When Eleanor opened it, no one stood there, just a courier envelope resting on the welcome mat. Her name was handwritten on the front in a script she recognized instantly. Arthur's death. Her breath caught. The paper was slightly aged, the ink slightly smudged as if it had been written in a hurry or through tears. She closed the door softly, sat on the edge of the unmade bed, and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, one folded letter and a smaller sealed envelope marked, for the attorney. Only after Eleanor reads this. She unfolded the letter, and with each line, the air seemed to thicken. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm already gone, and I fear I've broken your heart in the process. Please, before you judge me too harshly, let me explain. I wanted to leave you everything. You deserved it all and more. But my children, they came to me months ago with threats. They said if I left you a single cent, they'd contest the will, drag your name through the courts, and paint you as a manipulator. They said, she only stayed with you for your money. They said horrible things, things I knew weren't true. But the more I pushed back, the more vicious they became. And Eleanor, I was scared. Not for myself, but for the peace you so deeply deserve. I didn't want you to spend your golden years battling vultures. So, I made a choice. I created two versions of my legacy. The one they heard, the public will, was a decoy. I wanted to see who they would become when they thought they had it all. I wanted you to see it, too. The real will, the real plan is enclosed in the second envelope. Inside, you'll find the access details to the trust I created solely in your name. Contains the house, the stocks, the properties, the art collection, the accounts, everything. You never asked for anything from me. But I've spent 25 years quietly building a life for you in return for the one you gave me. You saved me, Eleanor. You gave me something no inheritance ever could. Dignity, safety, unconditional love. Please forgive me for the performance I had to leave behind. I only wanted the truth to reveal itself in time. And now it has. Forever yours, Arthur. Eleanor stared at the page, the words swimming before her eyes. She read the letter again and again. Each time the sharp ache in her chest softened, replaced by something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the day in that law office. Relief. Not for the money, not for the properties, but because Arthur had seen her. Truly seen her. He hadn't betrayed her. He had protected her in his own quiet, brilliant way. She looked down at the second envelope and opened it with careful hands. Inside were printed documents, notarized and signed. Bank account numbers, deed transfers, a legal trust in her name, and tucked into the final page, a mission statement. Arthur had created a foundation in her name, one designed to fund mentorships and scholarships for stepmothers and guardians of blended families. Women like Eleanor, who often gave everything and received nothing in return. It wasn't just a gift. It was a legacy. Eleanor closed her eyes, clutching the letter to her chest. For the first time in days, she let herself cry. Not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude, out of vindication, out of love. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. It whispers in letters left behind, in actions buried beneath layers of silence. In a truth that finally rises when everything else has fallen away. And in that moment, Eleanor knew Arthur had never left her out. He had simply saved the best for last. Eleanor didn't return to the law office. She didn't call Arthur's children. She didn't storm into what was once her home demanding recognition or vengeance or apology. Instead, she took a deep breath, folded Arthur's final letter, and began again. Not for herself, but for the people like her. The ones who loved quietly, who gave everything without ever asking for credit. The invisible mothers, the second wives, the quiet protectors. Within weeks, she activated the foundation Arthur had created in her name, the Eleanor Trust. Its mission was clear. scholarships for underrepresented stepmothers and guardians, women who often filled the gap in broken families, but were written out of their stories. Applications poured in. Women from all walks of life, nurses, teachers, bus drivers, finally saw themselves valued. Eleanor met them, shook their hands, listened to their stories, and for the first time, she no longer felt alone in the role she had carried for decades. She still lived in the same house, the one Arthur had left to her quietly, legally. The same house his children once assumed was theirs to claim. They returned one afternoon, weeks later, smug and entitled, with printed paperwork and threats of eviction. Sarah even arrived with a realtor, ready to list the home without so much as a knock. But when they opened the gate, they found Eleanor already seated on the porch, sipping tea, a file of documents neatly waiting beside her. "I'd ask you to sit," she said gently. "But something tells me this won't take long." They scoffed, laughed, called her delusional until she handed them the papers, the trust documents, the deeds, Arthur's signature, the notarized filings. They read in silence. The color drained from Sarah's face. David stared at the foundation brochure with his name nowhere in sight. Thomas paced like a man who'd just bet the house and lost. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She simply stood and looked each of them in the eye. "You can inherit money," she said calmly, "but character, that's earned." "No," one responded. There was nothing left to say. They left without another word. Later that night, Eleanor walked through the hallway lined with memories. Photos of vacations, birthdays, quiet dinners. Some had faces she no longer saw, his family, but others, like the one of her and Arthur standing arm in arm on the porch, still brought warmth. She placed his letter in a frame on the mantel, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that love, real love, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in sacrifice, in grace, in the quiet decision to rise when the world expects you to fall, and in choosing to build something lasting even after everything else is gone.